This is the story of a simple, hard-working man and a son who was ashamed of him. Since childhood, Ethan rejected his roots, did everything to hide where he came from, and when he got the chance, he erased his past completely. He believed that money, success, and status were everything in life. But what he didn't know was that his father, the humble man he despised so much, was hiding a secret. What happens when the truth comes to light? When life forces us to face our own mistakes. Today, you're going to hear an emotional story full of twists and turns, with an ending that will leave you speechless. Before we start, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what do you think is more important, money or character? Let's find out together just how far ambition can take a person. Now, get ready, because this story starts now. Since he was a child, Ethan felt ashamed of his father. Mr. James was a construction worker, a hard-working man who spent his days under the scorching sun, his hands calloused, his clothes always covered in dust and cement. But Ethan didn't see this as a sign of effort or dignity. To him, it was a symbol of failure. While the parents of his friends arrived at school in luxury cars, dressed in suits and ties, Mr. James would show up on his old bicycle, with the same warm smile, completely unbothered by the stares around him. But Ethan cared. He was mortified. Deep down, Mr. James never understood why his son distanced himself. He did everything he could to give Ethan the best life possible, saved every penny, bought the best school supplies, and celebrated each of his son's achievements. But for Ethan, that wasn't enough. He wanted a different life, one where he didn't have to hide his background. Slowly, he began avoiding his father. He refused to be picked up from school, avoided bringing him to school meetings, and when people asked about Mr. James's profession, he responded vaguely, as if he didn't want anyone to know the truth. As the years passed, embarrassment turned into distance. Ethan started looking at his father with disdain, as if this simple man wasn't worthy of being part of his story. And the worst part? Mr. James noticed it. But even so, he never stopped trying. He still congratulated Ethan on every accomplishment. But Ethan had already made up his mind. One day, he would leave that life behind and never look back. And that day was getting closer. Determined to never end up like his father, Ethan studied relentlessly. He earned a scholarship to a prestigious university and saw it as the perfect opportunity to start fresh. Away from the humble neighborhood where he grew up, he decided to erase every trace of his past. He introduced himself to his new friends as someone from an upper-middle-class background, and when they asked about his family, he lied without hesitation. He claimed that his father was a construction business owner who lived abroad for work. Over time, Ethan himself started to believe the fabricated version of his life. His shame ran so deep that he took things even further. During his first year of college, he legally changed his name, removing his father's last name to sever all ties. He stopped answering his father's calls, ignored his messages, and when Mr. James came to visit, he always made up excuses to avoid him. If he once avoided his father, now he pretended he didn't exist. Time passed, and Ethan achieved everything he had ever wanted. He graduated with honors, landed a prestigious job, and started making a lot of money. He bought a luxury apartment, a brand new car, and gained access to the most exclusive places in the city. To everyone around him, he was a success story, an example of perseverance. But only he knew the true cost of his success. Meanwhile, Mr. James never stopped following his son's journey from afar. Even after being rejected, he remained proud of Ethan. He continued to save every penny he earned, thinking about his son's future. But Ethan had no idea, and if he had, he probably wouldn't have cared. To him, his past was dead. But the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to come to light. Years passed, and Ethan no longer thought about his father. Until, one ordinary morning, his phone rang. On the other end, a serious voice informed him Mr. James had passed away. Ethan felt a chill down his spine, but the truth was, he didn't cry. He felt nothing. He just took a deep breath and asked about the legal procedures. After all, he needed to settle everything quickly and move on with his life. He attended the funeral out of obligation. He arrived wearing expensive clothes and dark sunglasses, showing no emotion. But as soon as he stepped into the cemetery, he was met with a scene that made him freeze. There were hundreds of people there. Men, women, elderly folks, children, all crying, holding up signs and photos of Mr. James. The signs read, "Thank you, Mr. James, and you changed our lives." Ethan looked around, confused. How could a simple construction worker have brought so many people together? Then he started hearing the stories. People shared how Mr. James had helped renovate homes for struggling families, supported kids in school, and never turned his back on anyone in need. Ethan's heart pounded. He had never imagined that his humble father had been so important to so many lives. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Amidst the crowd, a lawyer approached him, holding an envelope. With a serious tone, he announced in front of everyone, "Mr. James left a will, and there's something you need to know." Ethan felt a shiver down his spine. Suddenly, he realized that this moment would change his life forever. He had no idea what he was about to discover. Silence fell over the cemetery. All eyes were on Ethan as he held the will in his trembling hands. His heart pounded as he saw the lawyer's serious expression. He took a deep breath and opened the envelope. But as he started reading, his face burned with shame. Mr. James had saved every penny he ever earned. Despite living simply, he had carefully invested and accumulated a small fortune. But he hadn't done it for himself. Everything he had worked for, every extra hour on the job, every day under the burning sun, had been for one reason alone: to secure a prosperous future for Ethan. But there was one detail no one expected. Mr. James had known all along about Ethan's shame. He knew his son hid him, lied about his origins, and rejected him. And yet, he never stopped loving him. But now, for the first time, he decided to teach Ethan a lesson he would never forget. The will was clear. Ethan could only receive his inheritance under one condition. He had to stand in front of all those people gathered there to say goodbye to Mr. James and confess the truth. He had to admit every lie he told, every moment of shame he felt, every time he rejected his own father. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The crowd murmured. He looked at the lawyer, realizing there was no escape. If he wanted the money, he had to endure the greatest humiliation of his life. He slowly stepped onto the small stage next to the coffin. Holding the microphone in his trembling hands, he tried to speak, but his voice failed. Shame crushed his chest like a weight too heavy to bear. His teary eyes scanned the crowd. People who had loved his father, people he had never met, but who now seemed to know exactly who he was. Then, with a knot in his throat, he began. I spent my whole life lying about who I am, about who my father was. The crowd fell silent. Since I was a child, I was ashamed of him. I thought being a construction worker was beneath me. And so I lied. I told people he didn't exist, that I was an orphan. The words cut through him like a knife. He felt the weight of the judgmental stares, but continued. While he worked tirelessly, saving every penny for me, I rejected him. While he loved me unconditionally, I ignored him. And now it's too late. Tears streamed down his face. He looked at his father's photo beside the coffin and felt an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. For the first time, he understood. That day, Ethan left with nothing, except a lesson he would never forget. Because some riches can't be bought, and once lost, they can never be recovered.